لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد خير الأولين والآخرين وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين وانفعنا اللهم بالقرآن والذكر الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا متقبلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا واكرمنا ولا تهنا واعطنا ولا تحرمنا واثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وارض عنا. اللهم انا نسالك خير هذا اليوم فاسحبه ونصره ونوره وبركته وهداه، ونعوذ بك من شره وشر ما فيه وشر ما قبله وشر ما بعده، ولا حول ولا قوه الا بالله العظيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا الا ما علمتنا انك انت العليم الحكيم. السلام عليكم ورحمه الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, we're coming close to the end of this particular text that we're studying, this poem by Imam Sharafuddin al-Amriti, which is a particular work which is built upon the original work of the Imam Juwayni. And this course, which has been entitled The Roots of Interpretative Disagreements. And this is an overall introduction to the Islamic discipline known as Usul al-Fiqh, or the foundations of jurisprudence, of the legal foundations. Today we're going to be dealing with an issue known as al-istishab, or the Law of Presumption. And the Law of Presumption is a principle which is considered to be the final step that the scholar who's involved in interpretative or independent interpretation or scholarly endeavor, where he sort of takes refuge with the Law of Presumption upon not discovering any particular evidence which would support any particular position about concerning a new issue. Now, the hadith of Mu'adh ibn Jabal is held up as be the standard for the idea that when a scholar is confronted with a new issue which is not clearly articulated in the Quran or in the Sunnah, then he or she would then do what is called al-ijtihad. They take refuge to ijtihad, a sort of scholarly due diligence in order to arrive at what one believes to be the judgment of God in the issue. In this particular story of Mu'adh, as is known by many people, is the Prophet ﷺ was sending him off to Yemen to go teach the people Islam and to also judge between them and their issues, collect certain taxes, among other things. And he asked them, how would you judge when an issue is brought to you? And they said to him, Aqdi bi kitabillah, I will judge by the book of Allah. And then the Prophet said, and what if it's not in the book of Allah? He said, then bi sunnati Rasulullah, then by the sunnah of the Messenger of Allah. And he said, and if you don't find it there, he said to him, then ajtahidu ra'yi wa la alo, that then I will exert my mind and not be negligent. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he patted him on his chest and said, may praise God who has guided the messenger of God to that which pleases the messenger of God. And so this is sort of teaches us that there's a particular process or this this order of priority which is given first to the Quran, then to the Sunnah, and then to the lesser sources of Islam. As mentioned before, in Usul al-Fiqh we deal with three basic issues. Two of them are core and one is not a core issue of the science. Well, the first issue is the issue of the sources of Islam. We speak about the definitions, what are the bases for the authoritativeness of those sources. And so there are some sources which we consider to be indisputable sources, and then others are subject of dispute. The absolutely indisputable source is the Quran. All Muslim factions accept the Quran as the original and primary source of the Islamic teachings. When it comes to the Sunnah as well, all Muslims believe that the Sunnah is the source of the teachings of Islam, except that they may differ about what constitutes a valid Sunnah and what does not constitute a valid Sunnah. And that's mostly both for Sunnis and Shiites, that the Sunnis are not Sunnis because they follow the Sunnah and believe in the Sunnah, and the Shiites don't believe in Sunnah. Rather, we all believe in the Sunnah, except that we differ over what actually is a true Sunnah, an authentic Sunnah, and which one is not an authentic Sunnah. After those two, we get into areas of dispute when we look at it from the regard of the various Muslim factions. But from the regard of the Sunni majority, then we still have two more sources of Islam which are considered to be indisputable, at least amongst the Sunnis. The third source is what we call al-ijma', scholarly consensus, and we dealt with that in the past as well, the principle of scholarly consensus, which in theory fundamentally means that in one generation, a prior generation may actually consider something to not, or let's say had not come to accept certain to be a part of Islam, and then the generation that comes later actually accepting that thing to be becoming a crucial part of the Islamic teaching, which fundamentally suggests as well that Islam is in ziyada, as time goes on, even though the basic belief is that I say Islam is in an increase, is constantly growing in terms of what is essential amongst its teachings, even though the basic belief and understanding is that the Islamic teachings are complete, were perfected by the Prophet ﷺ. And so this issue of ijma', as we learned before, is the subject of great dispute over its proper definition, dispute over who are considerable in terms of determining a valid ijma' and a binding ijma' or consensus, and then also disregard whether or not ijma' actually is a valid a source, as we know that the Shia generally are opposed to it, or so when the Shia speak about ijma', then they're talking about the ijma' which is understood by the Sunnis. And that is not to say that ijma' has not occurred in the sense that ijma' is a reference to things transmitted to us from the early period until the present day by way of tawatur, which we often refer to as al-ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura, matters which are non-negotiable matters, that things that are known to be part of the religion by immediate necessity. And that is different from the ijma' of the fuqaha and the usuliyin. It's not the same type of ijma', and scholars they debate about whether or not ijma' has actually occurred historically, in stronger view that in the concept, according to the definition of the usuliyin, it's never occurred realistically, according to many scholars. So we have the Quran and the Sunnah, ijma', and then qiyas, legal analogy. Is the fourth of those sources agreed upon by the Sunnis, but again, the Sunnis may differ about what the proper rational bases of certain judgments, and so when you differ about what the rational basis for a certain judgment, then it may lead you to make a different judgment about one thing or another. So, for instance, the difference between the Hanafis and the Shafi'is regarding the obligation of zakat being due on the wealth of a child, and so some of them saying that Abu Hanafi said no, it's not, where the Shafi'is saying that it is because on the basis of it being wealth, and so the Hanafi no, on the basis of it being a child is not compulsory. So those examples about that. And so Imam al-Juwayni, and then followed by Imam al-Amriti in this particular poem, fundamentally, when it comes to the sources, they limit themselves to these four, or speaking about these four. That's not to say that they don't believe in beyond that. It can be beyond that, but generally, the Shafi'is, especially the early Shafi'is, were very limited in their numbers of sources, and they themselves were somewhat of a traditionalist traditionalist type of paradigm, where they adopted a traditionalist type of paradigm, which fundamentally tried its best to avoid any type of rational endeavor with regard to the sacred law, but of course found themselves compelled to do so in a number of different cases. And the Hanbalis even more so than that, whereas certain other schools, like Hanafi school and the Maliki school, they had a number more than these sources, more than just Quran and Sunnah, Ijma' Qiyas. There was Istihsan, Masalih Musara, in some schools adopting Qashara and Qablana, the Sitt al-Dara'a, a number amongst other things. So this particular chapter of Al-Istishab, Law of Presumption, is what is referred to as somewhat of a rational principle. It's a rational principle, and that itself tells us that in usul al-fiqh they're both revealed and rational sources of the teachings of Islam, even though the general tendency has been to not adopt such of an attitude historically. And inshallah, as we'll read through the text, and I'll continue to comment, and hopefully more jewels will sort of burst forth as we continue, inshallah. So Shaykh al-Amriti, he begins this particular section by saying, لا حكم قبل بعثة الرسول بل بعدها بمقتضى الدليل. بل بعدها بمقتضى الدليل. He said, there is no decree before the sending of the messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, rather after the sending in accordance with the proof. Now, this idea of there's no judgment, there's no ruling, there's no decree before a messenger is sent. This particular position is a position adopted by the majority of Muslim theologians, in particular those who adopted the rational sort of approach to theology. The scholars of Kalam, many of them influenced by the Mu'tazila, their predecessors, that the question was raised, okay, well, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had never sent a messenger, would there be a way for us to know whether or not something is good or bad, or something should be avoided and something should be adopted, right? And so this idea or the concept of the natural law, which, of course, the Greeks had their own articulation of the natural law. The Muslims and the Christians both adopted or appropriated some of that, into our tradition. The idea of the natural law and this concept of we call in Arabic at-tahsin wa taqbih al-aqliyan, the rational determination of good and evil. So it was a question that was raised. And so the Mu'tazila faction of the early Abbasid period, who actually had greatly influenced the Abbasid Khulafa, they themselves adopted this and appropriated this, and their basic idea or belief was that the mind, the reason, had the ability to determine the difference between good and evil. Much how we find, much the way that we find people in secular societies today believe that you can develop or arrive at universal standards for good and evil or morality, even though that is often trumped by positivism that's sort of like, basically, if it's law, then it's good, right? If the law says it's okay, then it must be good. If the law says it's not okay, then it must not be good. And then at times when we find and discover some sense of contradiction, we try to fight to alter and change the laws, you see. But many people believe that you can have universal morality and reason can lead you to that, even though many of the people who are arguing for it realistically are very much against the pre-modern rational tradition in many ways. Anyway, so there are many contradictions for those of us today. So the question is, well, is it, if a prophet was never sent, is there a way for us to know, right? And so he begins with this opinion that says, well, no, before prophets are sent, then there is no good or no evil, right? Even if we may be able to perceive some harm from certain things and some benefit from certain things, the judgment that something is good or something evil, that does not precede Allah's sending of prophets and messengers. And what results from that is this. If a person committed great harm to people in society, if a person was an idolater prior to Allah sending a messenger and then died in that state, then fundamentally it would mean that when the person meets Allah, then there is no responsibility, right? They have no responsibility. And this is the opinion of many of the scholars of the Ash'ari school, because this particular issue, it spills over, or actually is some of the part of the residue of theological discourse. For us today, it's really, just academic, realistically, because, Allah sent His messengers, and they sent His final messenger, and His final Sharia, it came to Muhammad ﷺ. But it is important for the area of law, because with a scholar, I look into the Quran, I don't find the ruling. I look into the Sunnah, I don't find the ruling. I look to see if there's consensus. I can't find no consensus. I try to arrive at the conclusion or the ruling of this new issue on the basis of a legal analogy. I can't establish it. Okay, well, then we give this issue the presumptive judgment that applies to it, right? But if I don't believe that there's a presumptive judgment, right, because before Allah sent messengers, everything is just okay for anybody, to do it. There's no morality prior to that. Then there's nothing to presume about a particular thing. I can't say that it's halal was haram, or it's originally halal was originally haram. Right. On the other hand, if I do believe that there's an original judgment that applies to it, then I can say that this is what should apply to that one issue. So there's no decree before sending of the messenger, rather after sending in accordance with the proof, according to this first position. That's a sort of mainstream position in theology. And then he says, "Well, aslu fil ashya'i qabla ash-shar'i tahrimuha la ba'da hukm shar'i." They said, and the original state of things before the occurrence of legislation is that they are forbidden, and not after a Sharia judgment. So the original state of things before the occurrence of legislation is that they are forbidden. So this is one opinion of scholars, that the presumptive judgment of actions and statements of people are that they're forbidden for us to say or to do until we find evidence from the revealed law that says it is okay to say or do that thing, right? And this is like, for instance, you have often, like, over the years, people have these debates about, like, whether or not you can say, like, Ramadan Mubarak, right? Can you say Ramadan Mubarak? Yeah. Kul aam wa antum bi khair, Alaikum alayna, things like that. And they say, well, no, because if the Sahaba didn't say it, if the Prophet ﷺ didn't say it, right? You have to have a precedent. This idea that without a precedent, you can't say something or you can't do something. Can we gather together and do dhikr, say la ilaha illallah 1,000 times in the group, right? Well, is there any evidence that the Sahaba did it or evidence that the Prophet ﷺ did that, right? So they say, well, no, you can't do it, right? So statements or actions, according to that opinion, is like, well, things are presumed to be haram until proven to be halal, according to one opinion. Now, this is different from what we've accustomed to hearing, right? We're accustomed to hearing the opposite. But this was the opinion of some scholars. This is a minority opinion, but some of the scholars held this view, and so they applied that to both ibadat and adat, to both matters of ritual worship and also to matters of custom. So when you get into the definition of what bid'ah is, a sort of an innovation, you find two basic definitions. One that gives consideration to both custom and worship, and then another that applies it only to worship. So like Imam Ash-Shatibi in his I'tisam, he gives one definition. He says, bid'atu ibaratun an tariqatin طريقة في الدين مخترعة تضاعي شرعية
يقصد بالسلوك عليها المبالغة في التعبد, that that bid'ah is an expression of a way invented in the religion which resembles the prescribed way of doing things, and the aim of acting in accord with that thing is to exaggerate our worship. That's to go a little bit further in our worship than what had been prescribed. So that definition is specifically for ibadah. But then another definition is at the end of it, it said, يقصد بالسلوك عليها ما يقصد بالطريقة الشرعية. And so it's the same thing, that an expression of a way invented in the religion which resembles the prescribed way. What is intended by it is the same was what is intended from the prescribed way of doing it, and that it covers both ibadah and ada. So if the Prophet ﷺ had a normative way of doing things which was not typically and not in the area of worship, right? Then we would say, well, that's a bid'ah. If the Prophet didn't do it, like the Sahaba themselves, when they were Umar ibn Khattab recommended to Abu Bakr to gather the pages of the Quran into one book. He said, كيف تفعل ما لم يفعله رسول الله? How can you do what the Messenger of Allah didn't do? Right? Then they asked Zaytuna bin Thabit. They asked me, you're in charge. Gather the pages of the Quran. Start this campaign. Lead it. كيف تفعلان ما لم يفعله رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم? How can you do what the Prophet didn't do? So there was this idea, understanding that even this wasn't even ibadah, right? In the normative sense, I'm just putting the book together, gathering the pages of a book, that for them bid'ah applied to both matters of custom and matters of worship. And so this is why the majority of the scholars, when they speak of bid'ah or innovation, they divide it into the 5 categories of fiqh, right? And so some types of bid'ah are compulsory, right, according to them. So like what the Sahaba did, they call what Abu Bakr and Umar and Zayd bin Thabit did a bid'ah hasana, right? They call it that. So whereas those who don't believe the bid'ah divides that way, they say there's no such thing as a good bid'ah, because the hadith kullu bid'atin dalala, every bid'ah is misguidance, right? And so when something has a basis in the Sharia, like in this case, it would be the actions of the Sahaba, is a source of law according to, like Imam Shatibi. He said, you don't call that bid'ah. Anything that has an asl is not called a bid'ah. So some of it's semantical at any rate. So first opinion was that before the messengers are sent, the actions and statements have no ruling. Second opinion, that before the messengers are sent, actions are presumed to be haram until proven halal through the Sharia itself. That Sharia has to let us know that it's okay to say what's up, right? It's okay, which is kind of crazy, that you can't say what's up, how you doing, right? Unless you have proof that that you can say it. But this is an opinion that was there. وَأَصْلُ فِي الْأَشْيَاءِ قَبْلَ الشَّرْعِ تَحْرِيمُهَا لَا بَعْدَ حُكْمٍ شَرْعِي بَلْ مَا أَحَلَّ الشَّرْعُ حَلَّلنَّاهُ وَمَا نَهَانَا عَنْهُ حَرَّمْنَاهُ. Rather, whatever the Sharia made permissible, we make permissible, and whatever it forbids to us, we regard it as forbidden, right? And then this is another opinion here, basically is saying that, it's not necessarily a different opinion. It's basically supporting the second opinion, which says that, if the Sharia says it's okay, then it's okay. If Sharia says it's not okay, then it is not okay. So rather, we have to get knowledge through revelation, in order to know if it's okay for us to do or not do something. وحيث لم نجد دليلا حل شرعا تمسكنا بحكم الأصل دليل حلي. وحيث لم نجد دليل حلي شرعا تمسكنا بحكم الأصل. And whenever we do not find an evidence of permissibility in the Sharia, we adhere to the judgment of the general principle. مستصحبين الأصل لا سواه وقال قوم ضد ما قلناه. It said, conforming to the principle and none other than it. However, a group of scholars have said the opposite of what we have said. Right. So if we say that it's haram, everything is presumed to be haram, until we find proof. The other opinion, the more popular opinion, is that everything is halal until proven to be haram. Right? So it's okay. Hey, what's up? Ramadan Mubarak. Yeah, well, you can't say that. Why not? What's your dalil that I can't say it? Now, what's your dalil you can say it? So people, again, that becomes a source of disagreement as well. It's like, what is the principle that you accept? If you accept the principle that things are haram until proven halal, and then the other person says, I believe things are halal until proven haram, and then you're going to clash. But not knowing that you have two basic principles that you differ upon. If you differ upon the principle or on your epistemology, then you're going to clash, you see, or you differ on your definitions, you're going to clash. So that's an important consideration when you're talking to people, you see. So then you might have to take it back to the asl. It's like, okay, let's debate this principle, right? If you want to really gain some clarity on who might be correct on this particular matter, right? So and whenever we do not find an evidence of permissibility in the Sharia, we adhere to the judgment of the general principle. أي أصلها التحليل إلا ما ورد تحريمها في شرعنا فلا يرد. Meaning that the basics, and whenever we do not find an evidence of permissibility in Sharia, we adhere to the judgment of the general principle, conforming to the principle of none other than it. However, a group of scholars have said the opposite of what we have said, meaning that the basic status of all things is permissibility, except where prohibition has occurred in our Sharia, then it is not to be refuted. And so this third opinion, if everything is assumed to be halal to prove haram, I can sit and do 20,000 la ilaha illallahs, right, or Allahu Akbar, so alhamdulillahs. Well, you say haram. Give me proof, dalil that I can't do that, right? What's your dalil? I can't do it, right? Another say, well, what's your dalil? You can do it. وقيل إن أصل فيما ينفع جوازه وما يضر يمنعه. And it was said that the basis with respect to what is beneficial is its permissibility, and that which is harmful is prohibited. So here, a fourth opinion. So the fourth opinion says, well, rather is a bit more nuanced than what people are saying. One opinion saying that, there's no morality before the Sharia comes. The second, things are unlawful until proven halal. The third opinion, things are lawful until proven haram. Right? Then they say, well, no, we look at the relative harmfulness and benefit of things. If the thing, is harmful, then haram. If the thing is beneficial, then halal, right? Right, that's what we presume. So again, going through the process, Quran, Sunnah, Ijma' Qiyas, I'm not able to determine what the ruling is, so my assumption is that, okay, well, it goes back to its asal, right? Whatever the origin, the presumptive judgment of the thing is, in this case, so I look at its relative benefit and relative harm, right? Then, so if cocaine is harmful to me, if scholars are debating, for instance, about whether or not it's halal or haram. If it harms me, it's a haram, right? But then, of course, there are these other considerations too, because you have proximate harm or benefit, and you also have remote harm or benefit, because sometimes things appear to be beneficial. At the beginning, to start, they seem beneficial or unharmful, but over time, we discover that they're harmful. So in the appearance of it, would be like, okay, well, in appearance, it's like, well, this is should be okay, because I don't see what's the harm that comes from it, But after a while, we discover it. If you have too much sugar, too much salt, or too much water. Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that water is haram or sugar is haram or salt is haram. But of course, an excess of those things can produce that, can produce the. So the doctor is going to tell you. That usually the scholars of fiqh are not going to say that, but they will tell you that it's haram to harm yourself, right? Right. So certain things are known. The harmfulness and the usefulness or benefit of something can sometimes known immediately, but other times they're not known immediately. وَقِيلَ إِنَّ الْأَصْلَ فِي مَا يَنْفَعُ جَوَازُهُ وَمَا يَضُرُّ يَمْنَعُ. And this is fundamentally the opinion, like the position that the Mu'tazila take, is that things are the madar, that the madar are halal, the things are haram, the harmful things are haram, and beneficial things are halal, and so the mind itself can perceive of these things, the benefits and the harm of things, and the goodness or the goodness or the evilness of something, or the wickedness of something is determined by its relative benefit or harm. And that's fundamentally what their position would be. Whereas the majority Sunni theologians, they say, well, no, that even though something may appear to be beneficial, it may turn out to be harmful long term. And then not just that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not have to offer a we call it an illah, a sort of operative justification or cause for his prohibitions or his allowances of things. That certain things may actually be somewhat harmful. Like, for example, think about a number of different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He allows, like cutting off the hand of a thief, for instance. Now, from the standpoint of the persons whose property was stolen, this is a benefit, to have this individual who stole their property, to have his or her hand severed, right, after being, discovered and of course, and indicted and found guilty. On the other hand, from the standpoint of the thief, that's a harmful thing, right? So nothing's purely good and nothing's purely evil. Even good things can have an aspect of evil or harmfulness or harm that comes that it contains. And many harmful things can have aspect of good or benefit that come to them. Like, for instance, a rapist, for him, it's something beneficial for him to rape a woman, right? Even though, of course, it's a warped type of morality, but it's something that he feels that, it felt okay, so it should be, but of course, from the woman, it's something evil. So nothing is purely good or purely evil, you see. And this is one thing that the Sunni theologians, they try to highlight. It's like, well, yes, that we can perceive some of the harms and benefits and things, but we ultimately can't say what things are good, ultimately good or evil. Polygyny is lawful, right? But it may harm a woman, right, in a relationship, if she's just not built to deal with it, you see. But Allah allows it, right? Because He allows it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to feel good, right? Fasting is compulsory, and it is spiritually beneficial to us, but you understand that it tires you out, it drains your energy, it can give you stomach pain sometimes, right? Sometimes you get headaches from fasting, right? But you still do it. At any rate, I'm just putting this out here so we be very clear that when we speak of like there being a universal morality built upon reason, then we have to highlight that there is no it's hard to determine pure good and even pure evil in those particular cases. وقيل إن الأصل فيما ينفعه جوازه وما يضر يمنعه وحد الاستصحاب أخذ المجتهد بالأصل عن دليل حكم قد فقد. So they said the definition of istishab is that the mujtahid revert to the basic principle whenever there's no specific proof for a specific judgment. So after exhausting all the sources of Islam, all right, and trying to determine what Allah's judgment might be, because remember that this particular discipline fundamentally is sort of a way of trying to disclose or to uncover certain standards by which we can judge the divine behavior, because He said He has a sunnah. So there's an assumption that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He has a sunnah, then perhaps He is giving us certain indications of how to determine that. So since the Prophet ﷺ is gone, so the orthodoxy was defined by trying to develop a process by which they can at least with overall or sort of near great probability be able to reach what is considered to be the judgment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so istishab itself, there are two basic types of istishab. One is called istishab al-nafy al-asli, and that is to say, the presuming the original lack of something, and then the other is istishab al-thubut al-asli, and that is the presuming the original confirmation or existence of something. And so I'm going to give examples of this so you become clearer, hopefully. So the first example, al-nafy al-asli, is like when we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made certain things lawful or compulsory or recommended, for instance. Like, let's say, the fast of the month of Ramadan. Fast of the month of Ramadan, compulsory. All Muslims have to fast the month of Ramadan, as long as they're able to do so. But there are also these other fasts that the Prophet ﷺ, he did, like the fast of Shawwal, there are, fasts of Ashura, among other fasts. So the question is raised, okay, well, if Ramadan is compulsory, is Shawwal also compulsory? Is the Ashura also compulsory, right? Is the day of Arafah also compulsory to fast, right? Because we already have a precedent of this being compulsory, but is that compulsory as well? So the scholars, in trying to answer that question, of course, they go through the Quran, they go through the Sunnah, they go through the Ijma, and look Qiyas, can't find anything. But then at the end, they say, well, we'll apply the rule of istishab, of the law of presumption. In this case, we presume that things are not compulsory, right? Unless there's proof, right? Because if things have no judgment before the shara', right? Then we'll say, okay, we won't give it a judgment. Or if we say things are lawful until proven to be unlawful, or whatever judgment may be, things are unlawful before they're made lawful. So in this case, it's like the presumption is that things are not compulsory, right, until there's proof that there is. We know that Ramadan is compulsory on the basis of revelation. And we also have indications that the other fasts may not be compulsory. Yeah. So the asl is that it's not compulsory. So they say, well, Shawwal is not compulsory, Ashura is not compulsory, Arafah is not compulsory, the 3 nights of every month, the white nights are not compulsory, fasting Monday and Thursday is not compulsory. You follow me? So that's fundamentally the way we go. Or similar to that would be like witr, like the witr prayer. And in this case, we know that there are 5 compulsory prayers. Fajr, or Subh, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha. But then there's the witr, Salatul Witr. Now, Salatul Witr, some scholars say it's compulsory. It's wajib. Like for instance, the Hanafi school is wajib. It's kind of like a 6th prayer, right? All the other scholars say that they're fard, but the other 5 are fard, and this one's wajib. And then some Malikis and some other scholars in their school, they consider the witr prayer to be wajib. But the question, of course, was presented. It's like, well, is witr compulsory? Do we have to pray witr? Is it sinful not to pray witr? And so Quran, Sunnah, Ijma, Qiyas, and right? And so we know that there are 5 that are compulsory without a doubt. So according to the rule of istishab, if those are the only 5 that we have 100% certainty about, then the asl is that witr is not compulsory either. There's nothing sinful about abandoning witr, even though, of course, we know that there's disagreement amongst the scholars about that. So this is called istishab and nafy al-asli, so the presumption of the original negation of a thing. Now, example of presumption of the original confirmation of something or the continuation of something, thubut al-asli. And this is an area that the Hanafis don't accept this explanation, and other scholars as well. The Shafi'is, some of the Shafi'is, they accepted this idea as a form of istishab. Say, for instance, the repeat of obligation of the prayers every single day, an example of that. We pray 5 prayers, right, on each day, right? So if I pray today, subh today, does it mean I have to pray tomorrow too? Right? So it's like, okay, well, the assumption based upon the evidence is that I do, right? So if I'm going to say that I don't have to pray tomorrow, I have to look for evidence in order to determine that I don't have to pray subh tomorrow. Or fast Ramadan next year, right? Or Hajj, an example. If I try to say about Hajj, I have Hajj every year, and in this case, the asal is the opposite, is nafi, of negation. The presumption is that is negated because of the evidence that exists, lets us know that Hajj does not have to be performed every single year. All right. So those are just two basic types of istishab. But again, this is a rational sort of principle, and in some ways it sort of challenges the mainstream Sunnis to explain what appears to be somewhat of a contradiction, because the Sunnis are very critical of the Mu'tazila for being hyper-rationalists and say that that the mind can determine good or evil. But the istishab is a very hyper-rationalist sort of principle. So if you are saying that things are presumptively halal or things are presumptively haram, or that there's no ruling at all, there's no moral value attached to anything before that, then on what basis are you making that judgment? You see, and it's not rooted in the Sharia itself and the revealed law, but it's just purely rational. You see, and so it be definitely is an area that Sunnis could be taken to task. And there's another opinion which is not mentioned here, which with regard to the matter of presumption. How do we deal with actions and statements that we really don't know the judgment or the ruling for in the Sharia prior to doing it? So Imam Ibn Qayyim Jawziyah, he talks about how we have to divide our actions into ibadat and ma'amalat, or the ibadat and adat, the matters of worship and matters of custom. And so with regard to worship, the presumption is that things are haram until proven halal, right? Again, so the example of sitting around doing 10,000, 20,000, tasbihat or tahlilat, things like that. They say, well, we can't just do that because we feel like it, right? We can't just because we feel like it. Rather, what we need to do is, look to see if there's some evidence that would allow that, from the sources. And some people are able to, many of us are able to find evidence for that. And this has been realistically the more standard position that scholars have taken historically, is that with regard to worship, you can't just add worship, make up your own worship. Say, well, Allah prescribed for you to worship in a certain way, then you have to worship and come to Allah in that particular way, right? As opposed to you say, well, prayer, I like the salat, but, I don't feel anything, so I'm just going to, I pray every day. I don't make salat, but I pray every day, I make supplication, make dua, because it really feels something. And this is a common mistake that a lot of new converts make, and it takes the time for a lot of new converts to become more consistent in their prayer, because a lot of times people think that when I perform the salat, I'm actually supposed to be feeling something every single time I perform my prayer. Rather, the prayer itself, the salat itself is something, it's an obligation to begin with, and being an obligation, there's a certain amount of kulfa, a type of weightiness that comes with performing an obligation. It's a certain time you have to do it, certain number you have to do it. It's it's like a routine type of action as well. And then often when we pray, many people don't even know what they're saying, because it's a ritual. You understand. And the language of prayer is Arabic, you see. So even though you don't understand it, you still have to perform it in Arabic. So the spiritual benefits of the prayer are not often seen right away in the same way we would see the benefits of like working out, right? Doing aerobics or lifting weights. You feel that when you finish that. You finish aerobic, you go run a lap, you feel that. But in the spiritual benefits of the salat, it takes time for you to really see the benefits of them. And some of those benefits can be some things as mundane as, I didn't drink today. Why? Because salat, I know one of the rules of salat, you can't be drunk when you perform the salat. Or I didn't commit fornication or adultery today. Why? Because I wanted to make sure I got all my prayers done, because I need to be in ghusl, right? You understand? And so it interrupts our normal, facade or corrupt type of actions, you see. This is a couple examples. It was why in the Quran, Allah says, Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. That salat, it brings an end to indecency and evil. So it brings an end to it. So if you're praying the right way, eventually that's what will occur. You see, and it begins with some very simple things as that, or that, I didn't go out with, I didn't walk out the house half naked today. Why? Because I wanted to be able to pray. You understand? So it's like, because I know in my prayer I'm supposed to be covered a certain way, right? So it's there's some very sort of immediate, sort of mundane benefits that come through it, but like the muscles, your spiritual muscles, they strengthen over a long period of time. And so if a person is not feeling the prayer because I can't understand the prayer, just view it in this way. But remember we have dua, we have supplication. So you can make dua in any language you want to, in your original language, So we have dhikr, we have dua, we have the salah itself. There are many different ways of praying, but the compulsory prayer, this is our way of maintaining our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see, it's dhikrullah, wa dhikrullahi akbar, wa ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub, the remembrance of God. By the remembrance of God, hearts find contentment, they find rest, in the remembrance of God, And so it takes time, and eventually you become stronger through that. So hopefully there's some benefit that comes from that. And, so this is what we call the Law of Presumption. And we see how I'm sorry, I didn't finish, as a matter of fact. So basically, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya says that with regard to matters of worship, you can't just do whatever you want to do. You can't just make up your own worship, add to worship. We presume that things are haram until proven halal. With regard to non-worship issues, customary matters, halal until proven haram. Right? Things are halal until presumed to be halal until proven haram. And that's why one poet, in the Sheikh Abdurrahman Sa'di, he mentions aslu fi adatina al-ibaha hatta yaji asarif al-ibaha. That that the origin of things regarding customs is that they are permissible until the evidence of the lack of permissibility is established. So with that, we'll open up for any questions that you might have at this point. Wa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.
Okay, so one of the questions online was, how did the scholars who said things are prohibited by origin explain the fact that there are Quranic verses saying things are prohibited? Wouldn't this be
Mm-hmm.
would this be inappropriate for them, or like did they do what's correct in that?
Well, there's a difference between. We're talking about the in cases where there is no verse that prohibits something. So in the face of a new issue, an issue that we're not able to find a direct prohibition of it, are we to assume that it's okay to do it, or are we to assume that it's not okay to do it? You understand? Yeah. So there may not be a verse in the Quran that is general enough to apply or place this particular underneath that particular rule. You see, and so Ishab is dealing with issues where there is no nas, there is no precedent, right? There is no indication in any of the sources that this is something halal or haram to do. So in the absence of that, the question is, okay, well, what do I assume? Can I do it, or should I avoid it? Right. So this is fundamentally what that the difference is between the two. Yeah. Right. I mean, so the question is, what the proofs of these different positions about something's presumptively haram, something presumptively halal. I mean, the scholars who argue that things are presumed to be halal, they quote certain verses of the Quran, like for instance. هو الذي خلق لكم ما في الأرض جميعا. It is He who created for you all that is in the earth, right? He created for you all that is in the earth. And so here they're implying from it that, if Allah created everything for us in the earth, then everything is lawful for us to indulge in. So we presume things to be halal until proven haram. Other scholars respond back with this and say, well, no, this verse and verses like this are not proofs of the permissibility of things. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse, He's fundamentally just reminding us of His favors upon us. That's it. That's all He's doing. You see, that He's giving us very much, but from that we can't deduce that everything is okay for us to indulge in. And this is definitely the position that was expressed by Al-Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi in Ahkam al-Quran, because his position, he argues that, well, things have no ruling before the shara, right? So there's nothing to presume. We don't presume halal, we don't presume haram. We just say that we have no ruling. We don't presume anything. We just look for any evidence beyond that, So, but that particular position is, again, it's more academic than anything else because the shara has come, right? So realistically, what we're dealing with today is the matter of either is presumptively haram or presumptively halal, right? So, so if you say that, they have nothing at all, and this is not evidence for it, then it's like saying that it is an evidence for it, because if things don't have a judgment, I can presume that it's okay for me to indulge in it. Does that help? That's an example of that particular position. The other position, scholars would utilize things like, that the religion has been perfected. The issue that the Prophet warned of innovating in the religion, things like that. So that's where those two different perspectives originate from. Right, so there's evidentiary bases for both positions, but it's just that they're debating about the actual interpretation of them.
As non-theologians, which principles should we adhere to? And you had mentioned there are 4 principles. How do we discern which principle to follow?
Well, I put it like this. Once a companion, he came to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet perceived from him that he was coming to ask about the question of righteousness. And he said, you came to ask about righteousness, correct? And he said, Na'am. Yes, I did. And so the Prophet ﷺ responded to him, Istafti qalbak. He said, get a fatwa, take a fatwa from your heart. Right? And he said that, he said, al-birru ما اطمأنت إليه النفس واطمأن إليه الصدر القلب. It said that the righteousness is whatever the heart feels comfort with in doing it. وإثم ما حاك في النفس وتردد في الصدر. And sin is whatever makes you feel uneasy when you do it, or the things that when you do them, you feel uneasy about them. And now, it could be said that, well, this particular companion, the Prophet ﷺ, gave him this answer because he knew his state, and that he's an individual who's informed by wisdom, and as well that his heart was a pure heart. You can say this to certain people, and people say, well, the Prophet said, take a fatwa from my heart, follow my heart. But you might have a corrupt heart. It might not be as pure as this other individual. It may not be informed by wisdom. And it's like someone saying the hadith of Innamal a'malu binniyat, that these are my intentions. That my intention is that this woman is my wife when I sleep with her, and it's like but some people can be corrupt to that way. It was my intention, right? I made it my intention. Or the hadith of إذا لم تستحي فاصنع ما شئت. That whenever you lack shame, do whatever you like, right? You say, well, I don't feel any shame, so I guess it's okay, right? I blew his brains out, but hey, I guess it's all right. I didn't feel ashamed when I did that. So again, you have to be concerned about your own spiritual state. So if your spiritual state is such that you truly want to please God, and you're seeking deeper knowledge of God, right? And you're, trying to come closer to God, then you're probably in a better situation to make that judgment about how to discern what particular rule we should be living by. You see, because we don't want to anger God by doing something that God doesn't approve of. But at the same time, we if we are going to do something, then we should be sure, or at least have some degree of comfort about the general permissibility of it. You see, so istafti qalbak. That's what I tell people a lot. And people come to me and they have questions about things, and I started this some years ago because what I didn't like, I got tired of is like when you give a person an opinion. And then the individual says, later on when things don't work out and they blame you, they say, oh, it's because so-and-so. If you never told me that, I wouldn't have done this. And I say, well, this opinion exists, that one exists, and this is the basis of it. In the end, istafti qalbak. That's what I tell people now. And people take it as a sign of like non-committal. It's like, no, it's not a sign of non-committal. I have my own convictions, but at the same time, you have to meet Allah. It is going to be your decision, that you meet Allah. And you're not going to be able to use me or shaitan or anybody as a basis for justifying your actions. So that's not going to be, not going to be how it's going to happen. Allah knows best.
5 types of bid'ah. Could you list them again?
Well, yeah, the 5 types of bid'ah are the same as the 5 basic values assigned to human actions, which are compulsory, recommended, neutral, disliked, and what did I forget? What did I miss? I said recommended. And right, prohibited, muharrama, bid'ah muharrama. Yeah, thank you. So compulsory, recommended, neutral, disliked, and forbidden. So those are 5 categories, right? So the majority of scholars, what they'll say is that when the Prophet said "Kulla bid'atin dalala," every bid'ah is misguidance. It meant bid'ah muharrama. The forbidden type of bid'ah is muharrama, is misguidance. Whereas those who don't believe in the existence of good bid'ah, they will say, well, no. This is you don't call something that has a source for itself a bid'ah. We just call it permissible, something that you can do. It has a precedence even amongst the rightly guided khulafa from the Sahaba. It's from the Imams and their principles, masalih musala, or istihsan, or shara man qablana, whatever the source would be. Anything that has an asl, they say, well, no. That you don't call it bid'ah. So it can be somewhat of a semantical issue.
There was another person asking if you could repeat the 4 principles and explain tabatul asli again.
Thabut al-asli. Oh, right. Well, the issue of I don't think I mentioned 4 principles. I think I mentioned 4 opinions about the law of presumption. And so I mentioned the first opinion, which was that things are neutral, that actions or statements are neutral until or before the revelation, before Allah sends any messengers. And so that is to say that before Allah sends a messenger to a society, then even if people are doing things that we generally consider to be immoral, that they have no responsibility, that Allah won't hold them account for it because they lack a moral one to determine what true morality is amongst them. And so historically, the mainstream have not given authority to reason. That reason is not the basis for determining morality. So. But then, so that was the first issue. That there's no ruling on anything before the revelation comes. But then there's the second view is that things are presumed to be haram until proven halal. The third, that things are halal until proven haram. And then the fourth one was that that things that are harmful are presumptively haram, and things that are beneficial are presumed to be halal. And then I added a fifth, which is not mentioned in the text, which is that matters of worship are presumed to be haram until proven halal, and matters of custom are halal until proven to be haram. So the issue of the thubut al-asli, fundamentally the idea is that we are to assume that what has already been confirmed to be, let's say, an obligation, continues to be an obligation anytime the conditions connected with that obligation repeat themselves, right? So if Ramadan happens once a year, in Ramadan, or fasting for the month is only during the month of Ramadan, every time, if I fast this year, then I assume or presume that, next year I'm supposed to fast as well. Yeah, that's compulsory to fast as well. So that's an example we call the thubut al-asli. And again, that's what many scholars say, that's not istishab, because that's just simply the repeat of obligations based upon certain regulating factors like time and among other things have been established via evidence that we have from the Quran and from the Sunnah. So the type of istishab that is agreed upon is nafy al-asli, the sort of original negation. That is like to say that something is presumed to be, for instance, not an obligation, even though it may resemble another obligation, is assumed to be not an obligation because there's no evidence of it. All right? What about you guys? Any other questions? No? Okay. Anything else, Aida? That's it? That's it? Alhamdulillah. So, as I mentioned earlier, for those of you who came in a little late, is that probably next week will be our final class. We'll be finishing the text. And, so you won't have to come out so early anymore for the rest of the semester. Inshallah. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا وسبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر وسبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين آمين. السلام عليكم.